We continue our working day, and we'll talk about the information policy for people who are left on the occupied territory. There is a lot of phone calls and information that people are isolated from the information from the bigger part of the territory of Ukraine. So what the state, volunteers and public organizations have to do. Svitlana Yeremenko, media expert and regional media monitor and project coordination, the executive director at the Pylyp Orlyk Institute for Democracy, will talk about this. Also, Volodymyr Kypen, Pylyp Orlyk Institute for Democracy and Donetsk Institute for Social Studies and Political Analysis, and Ihor Zots, who is chief editor of the Donechchyna newspaper. The floor is yours. Dear friends, thank you for coming here. As I understand, the problem that we want to talk about today concerns not only us, and this briefing is to involve into this extremely important problem, extremely important for the entire society, the attention of the authorities, the attention of journalists and editors, and everybody who is concerned with what's going on in Ukraine. So, almost a year ago, we saw the launch of the undeclared war of Russia against Ukraine, an unprecedented Russian information aggression against Ukraine. For, well, almost a year has passed, but what has changed over this time? Of course, there were positive steps, and we've seen them, and we rejoice at them. But what are these steps? First of all, this Ukrainian Crisis Media Center was set up, where we can get new information. Also, we know that the law on public broadcasting was adopted. We also are happy that we see the work of the newly elected National Council on Broadcasting Issues, and it is pro-Ukrainian as contrasted to the former composition, and they have even issued a warning to Inter TV channel for the anti-Ukrainian content that was shown during the New Year's celebrations. This is a positive thing. We also have some efforts on the part of volunteers. For instance, the students of Kyiv Mohila Academy are running the Stop Fake site and try to combat the deluge of fakes that the Russian propaganda is sending to Ukraine and to social networks. Regrettably, these fakes and unchecked information find their way to different sites and other media, including television. But regrettably, this is being done exclusively by volunteer efforts. I would also classify as a positive change the creation of the Information and Analytical Center of the Council for National Defense and Security and the Anti-Terrorist Operation. The fact that we constantly hear the information from Mr. Lysenko and Mr. Seleznov, this is all positive developments, but from the very start of the war, and I call this war because I'm sure that we should name a spade a spade. This is not an anti-terrorist operation, but this is an undeclared war of Russia against Ukraine. So from the very start of this war, we, the experts of the Institute for Democracy named after Pylyp Orlyk, and 25 people work in our institutes who are journalists and journalism teachers, sociologists, philosophers. We were going to regions, first of all, northern and eastern regions. We were talking to leaders of public organizations and journalism about what is information war and how they may combat the Russian aggression and what the Ukrainian authorities and journalists can do in order to counteract the Russian propaganda so that it is not as influential as it is and it does change the consciousness of our citizens. Despite all this, we, our experts, were saying that Ukraine needs an information strategy or concept or doctrine, whatever we call it, of the information policy of Ukraine, which was not created over the 23 years of independence. Regrettably, we still don't have it. In midsummer, we, the experts and media lawyers, were invited to discuss this strategy that was prepared by the State Committee on Radio and Television, but regrettably, we, the media experts and journalists and editors, we expressed a lot of critical remarks and amendments to this strategy, and it was sent back for elaboration. However, I haven't heard a single word about it since then. It just got lost, so the information policy was not worked out by the state. And we still do not have programs on protection of the information environment. Until now, we don't have a channel, a powerful channel of broadcasting abroad, which could be a propaganda tool for Ukraine in the world. Yes, 1+1 has created the channel Ukraine Today, but regrettably, it does not have the capacities and experts so that we could become tranquil and say that they work very well for audiences abroad, for different countries of the world. Regrettably, we see that we are losing the information policy in Ukraine, and we are losing it abroad. And we have such examples. For instance, in Denmark, only one site created by a Ukrainian journalist who works now in Denmark does tell about the events that are happening in Ukraine. This information is being reposted by Norway and Sweden, but can you imagine this, just one site? Same, my colleagues have come back from Bulgaria recently. Almost all Russian channels are working in Bulgaria, and imagine that Bulgarians still think that a civil war is happening in Ukraine, which, of course, you understand is not so. What I mean is that we need a channel for broadcasting abroad, and the Ministry for Information Policy says that they are going to create two channels, a channel for broadcasting abroad and a military channel. I don't think we should divide our forces and money. Anyway, we have too many channels. Maybe we should join the efforts of 1+1 and the First National Television Channel and create a powerful channel that could work for abroad and disseminate truthful information about Ukraine and from Ukraine. Also, we need a coordination center that the information and the analytical center of this Council for National Defense and Security failed to become. We still don't have a powerful coordination center that would work to oppose the information aggression and would provide a worthy response to slander and coordinate the efforts that both society and mass media and state should apply. Our recent monitoring that we have been conducting for the last 3 years, and for the latest year we've been researching very actively the information space of Donetsk region, says that the situation on occupied territories deteriorates with every passing day. And I would like Volodymyr Kypen, who is the expert of the Pylyp Orlyk Institute for Democracy, candidate of philosophy and director of the Donetsk Institute for Social Studies and Political Analysis, tell you about this. He is one of the team from Donetsk who are researching, studying the transformation that took place and is taking place on the occupied territories and on the liberated territories as well. What we see today. Mr. Volodymyr, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to tell you a few words about the characteristics of the information space on the parts of the territory which are now under the control of Russian separatist forces and on the liberated territories in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass. I would like to first of all say that talking about the development of the situation, we had quite a clear picture of transformation that started in times of Maidan and till the present period of time. We saw how, in the beginning, the information space that existed in Donbass and that was comprised of two main parts, regional media and Russian media, that was openly exercising the function of the information special purpose forces of Yanukovych authorities against democratic forces, imposing the myths on the population so that the changes in Kyiv are not perceived properly. But at that time, till March, there was at least some possibility for having alternative point of view. But even that was lost in May when the combatants seized control over Donetsk. Then Ukrainian and pro-Ukrainian mass media were under the pressure and under the repressions, and they were this way pushed away from newspaper and electronic mass media. The TV channels, they were working till summer, but in summer they stopped operating on the territories occupied by militants, and all that territory with a few millions of population was absolutely cut off from Ukrainian information space. Half a year after, the situation has just worsened. Some attempts to give the information on what is Ukrainian point of view of this or that event was stopped by the militants. Ukrainian authorities could not ensure the Ukrainian cannot ensure that the Ukrainian point of view is disseminated. And we believe that that is the first key problem, the lack of publicly discussed clear strategy of the state in relation to the territories which are occupied by militants today, in relation to the territories which are liberated from the militants. The lack of strategy does not allow to wider look at the information policy, what to do with these territories and with this population. The decision of the authorities are non-systemic and non-efficient. The result, the sociology in winter, the sociological surveys in winter during the elections which were taking place on the territory of Donbass in autumn show that the Russian understanding of the situation prevails among this population. The results of the elections, when the representatives of all political forces were elected to the parliament, demonstrates that the population is still believing old stereotypes and old myths. And that is on liberated territories. Now we can say that the lack of the clear position of pro-Ukrainian representatives of the NGO sector and politicians is a big problem, and it does not give an opportunity to clearly talk about the problems which exist. The whole media space within the occupied territories is completely controlled by the armed separatist forces. The only small segment and that is internet, and those users who can use the satellite dishes and who are not limited to only TV channels have at least some chance to get alternative information. Our monitoring shows that the nature of the content which is presented by the electronic and printed media of the so-called DNR, TV channels of so-called DNR, cannot be qualified even as a propaganda. That is information subversion activity which is part of the war. If there's no understanding of that, and if there's no adequate reaction to such information war against Ukraine, leads to problems, and even in the future, when these territories are liberated, we will not be able to quickly return the situation back to Ukrainian space. We can say that even the latest publications, like Komsomolets Ukraine, Komsomolets Donbassa, the editorial offices of which included Ukrainian version in their media, they are closed, and the whole content is made in Moscow. Talking about the information which is in media, This is not journalism. These are special information campaigns on brainwashing the population. The latest situation, which could be considered as a good news, is that starting from yesterday, Express TV starts broadcasting to Donetsk from the south, and it could cover at least some part of the territory which is controlled by militants. But this does not change the whole situation. And in the end, I would like to say, without developing and implementation of the information state strategy, and that is what democratic forces from Donetsk region and Lugansk region insist, without cutting off Moscow, Russian, and so-called DNR's TV channels in these territories, will be impossible. I would like to introduce Ihor Zots, the editor of the only Ukrainian language newspaper in Donbass. During all this time, while the Party of Regions was in force, he was managing to keep the newspaper alive. But now, when separatists arrived, he had to leave to Kyiv, and now he's publishing newspaper Donechchyna here for his own money, and is trying to at least bring the information this way to this occupied territory. First of all, I support everything that my colleagues have said. Today, for the citizens of Donbass, well, you can imagine yesterday match of Donetsk Shakhtar. It was impossible to see yesterday's football match of Shakhtar. My colleagues in Donetsk were watching it in the internet, and the same is true about radio. They have more than 40 TV channels there, and Ukraine is not broadcasting there. What they are talking about is that Ukraine has surrendered and so on. So how it all started. When the president was elected, there were some opportunities to express the ideas of Ukrainian authorities in Donetsk, but this did not happen. And in July, there was not a single newspaper published out of those newspapers which were talking about the life in Donetsk region. We were publishing in Kyiv, and in Uryadovy Courier, I wrote an article, Donbass in Information Occupation, and this title reflected the situation, and there were proposals there on how to create some alternative on liberated territories, alternative to TV, because Oblast TV was seized in April, a month before presidential elections. But unfortunately, it's no surprise that they are doing it. These are terrorists. They have one task, to destroy and go further. But why? Ukrainian authorities, they have made attempts to restore on the liberated territories the Oblast TV, but unfortunately there's no regional TV, Oblast TV, no regional radio, and the newspapers of the authorities are published in very small circulations, and these are the newspapers which were founded by the authorities in Volnovakha, in Mariupol, in other places. So you know what's happening with printed media, and usually people were reading printed media. Now their influence is minimized. And on the other hand, a month ago in Donetsk, they started publishing DNA newspaper, Donetsk Republic. Its circulation is 50,000. Can you imagine 50,000 copies? A year ago, even all the regional newspapers never had such a circulation, even all of them together. And the newspapers which are published on the liberated territories, their circulation is not bigger than that. The information space is taken by terrorists, and they do what they want. From the time when my colleagues where like coordination sent, there was some NGO, and there were proposals. Let's do something with that information aggression. And they were suggesting to stop it. There are technical means to stop this TV propaganda. People who are normal mentally, it is impossible to talk even to them. There are some authorities. I believe they just pretend. They say, let's wait, maybe it will be resolved on its own. But unfortunately, this doesn't happen, so something is to be done. We need to stop this TV propaganda. We need to maybe start the regional TV, and let's take the experience of the Voice of America, Radio Liberty of the times of the Cold War. We need to strengthen this segment of communal newspapers so that they show what is happening in these territories, because unfortunately there's no big difference in the moods of people who live on occupied territories and territories which are liberated. What should journalists do? I'm deprived. I have no financing. In Donetsk, the authorities were never supportive of Ukrainian newspapers. The newspaper Donechchyna, the volunteers find me, and we are publishing it in Kyiv, even on occupied territories. We publish it, and we then send it to liberated territory. This is a big problem, because these people, while Ukrainian authorities were thinking about what to do, those people are so far away from Ukraine. They left, so to say. That is the situation. But we need to change it. We need to win. That is why we are here. Any questions? News of Donbass. I have a question to Svitlana Yeremenko. How could you comment the role of media in the process of transparency of authorities? And second question, our colleagues made a survey in Slaviansk and Mariupol, which media they trust. In Slaviansk they were saying Ukrainian, but they don't have any other TV channels but Ukrainians. In Mariupol they were saying Russian, that Ukrainians are lying, or they were saying we don't believe any media, any TV, but we just look in the internet. How media can help in this situation? First, I would like to specify quickly for you to understand. Today, There's so much propaganda waste, and it comes from 10 TV news channels. There are 30 TV channels, 3 separatist channels, 3 websites. But at that time, we, our authorities, our journalists, are doing nothing or doing very little to change the situation. But at that time, the terrorists are strengthening their influence. They created the Ministry of Information, a big newspaper which is called Peaceful Donbass. Can you imagine? Peaceful Donbass. How can media influence the authorities? How can they make it more transparent? I believe that media have to try and write the truth. I am absolutely against criticizing the authorities. I believe and I'm sure that we need to call things directly, the proper names. The war is the war. We call it ATO, but people are killed. The authorities are to be criticized, but for some specific actions, not in general. Our authorities are bad, they are betraying us, but we need to criticize for some very specific actions. Like now we're criticizing for the authorities not doing anything to give information to occupied territories. This experience, Victoria Sumar, she read our yesterday's press announcement. She wrote in Facebook that the situation could be changed only after we liberate these territories. When we liberate these territories, it will be late to do anything. Those people will turn into brainwashed people, because our people we know, the people who we know, the journalists, our colleagues come from there, and they say that every one of them observed how absolutely adequate people with university degrees who half a year ago were patriots of Ukraine, now under the influence of that flow of this propaganda, they are changing their views to the opposite. And if before they were supporting Ukraine, now they are blaming Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian army and all the and they say that the Ukrainian army is committing all the crimes, but not the terrorists. And I looked around. There is a good experience of how to work on occupied territories. If we cannot do it ourselves, maybe we need to invite consultants. There is an example which is good example. Canal Betsat operates from Poland and covers Belarus. And that's a great example. Why not do that? Again, there is an example of Israel. There is an example of the US. The operation, the period of 1990-91, when there was a war in Iraq, and occupation of Kuwait, and the actions of the US. Information component was the main one in the victory, and they had the broadcasters on the occupied territories. There were examples like the Voice of America and the BBC were broadcasting from Saudi Arabia to Kuwait and to Iraq. And there were many examples how to work on occupied territories. I believe it's not normal in the 21st century to leave people without any information. People say there's internet, but in Ukraine there are about 40% of people who use internet. These are mostly young people, but on the occupied territories, the providers do not give an opportunity to internet to operate, or the cables are cut because of the shellings. Maybe you have some other questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time left. Thank you. I believe we'll be coming back to this topic. We'll be examining the successful cases of the state, other countries, the crisis situations, given impetus to some innovative solutions. And I believe that the synergy of the state and volunteer organizations will give an impetus to resolve that situation. And as a conclusion, we experts of the Pylyp Orlyk Institute of Democracy, we believe that there are some certain steps of the authorities in counteraction in information war, but they're not coordinated, they're not thought of. There's no strategy, no tactic in that, and we have to state that actually there's no well thought of information policy that would address the needs of the military of the wartime. Our next briefing will take place in 1 minute.